You wake up in a hut made of mud, straw, and prayer. It's barely dawn, and your stomach is already screaming, not from skipping dinner last night, but from skipping most dinners that month. You're not sick, you're not cursed, you're just a medieval peasant, and starvation is your default state. Breakfast? That's a dream. Maybe, if you're lucky, there's a crust of rye bread so hard it could double as a weapon. Maybe a thin gruel that tastes like sadness and ashes. There's no coffee, no eggs, no fruit, just the ever-present gnawing void where your appetite used to live. The harvest failed again, but of course it did. The soil is tired, the weather is cruel, and the tools you have, wood, rope, and blind hope. You plow the same cursed field year after year with no fertilizer, no irrigation, no science, just superstition and sore hands. And when the crops don't grow, you don't eat. But the Lord still wants his tax. The church still demands its tithe. And if you don't give, they don't ask questions, they just take. A portion of your grain, your last hen, even your children, if they need laborers or crusaders. Hunger is never an excuse. It's just your reality. And when winter comes, oh, winter, that's when the real suffering begins. The pantry is empty, the animals are gone, the fields are frozen tombs. You boil bark for soup, chew leather for calories, pray for a rat in your trap because meat is meat. Children die quietly. Elders stop speaking, and you keep going. Not because you're strong, but because you have no choice. In a medieval village, food wasn't a given. It was a gamble you lost every season. Let's talk about food distribution. Not that you ever saw any, because in the grand medieval food chain you were plankton. The lord of the manor? He dined like a king. Multiple courses, roast meats, imported spices, white bread so refined it barely resembled flour. And you got what was left, if anything was left. You could grow barley, but you couldn't keep it. You could raise pigs, but they weren't yours. Every ounce of your labor fattened someone else's belly. Your crops filled granaries that you weren't allowed to enter. Your livestock walked into castles and didn't come back out. The Lord's table was your garden's afterlife. And when there was a famine, which there was often, the upper class didn't starve. They stockpiled. Monasteries hoarded grain. Nobles sealed their vaults. And you were told to be grateful if you received a handful of spoiled oats or moldy rye as charity. You were starving, but decorously. Meanwhile, the church preached humility while feasting behind stone walls. The same priests who demanded tithes spoke of heavenly reward as your stomach twisted on itself. Bread for the soul, they said, but not for the body. Markets were no better. Prices surged during shortages. And guess who still had coin? Not you. Your payment came in sweat and suffering. Inflation wasn't economic theory, it was death by decimal. The rich adjusted, the poor expired. And don't even think about hunting. The forests were owned. Yes, even nature had a landlord. Poaching a rabbit could get you flogged or worse. So you kept your head down. You swallowed the hunger. You watched others eat and called it order. In a medieval village, food was power. And you had none. Let's break down your daily meals, if you can call them that. Breakfast? Usually skipped. Not because you were intermittent fasting for health, but because there simply wasn't anything left. If you were lucky, maybe a bowl of pottage, a thin, lumpy stew made from whatever root vegetables hadn't rotted yet. Mostly onions, sometimes leeks. If it had flavor, it was probably accidental. Meat? Forget it. Maybe on holidays, maybe. And even then, the scraps, gristle, offal, bones, after the Lord's dogs had their fill. You'd boil the same bones for days, hoping for nutrients that weren't there. Protein deficiency wasn't a risk, it was a guarantee. Bread was your staple, but not the soft, golden kind you know today. No, you ate black bread, so coarse and heavy it could bruise you if dropped. Made from rye, sometimes tainted with ergot. Fungus that causes hallucinations, seizures, and death. But it was food, so you ate it. Fruit? Seasonal, rare, usually fermented into alcohol because it kept longer than hope. Vegetables? Mostly turnips and cabbages, boiled until all texture and nutrition surrendered. Dairy? If the animals hadn't been sold or stolen. Eggs? Only if the chickens survived the wolves, the weather, and your hunger. You didn't eat to grow strong. You ate to delay collapse. And that delay grew shorter every winter. Malnutrition wasn't a crisis, it was a lifestyle. Children grew up stunted. Teeth fell out by 30. Bones snapped from minor injuries. And yet you kept moving. Because stopping meant death, and death meant relief. In the medieval village, survival wasn't about strength. It was about enduring decay. One bite at a time. Every few years, the sky turned against you. Too much rain, not enough sun. A late frost, a dry spring, a summer that felt like morning. And just like that, the crops failed. Again. But this wasn't just a bad year. It was a death sentence. Welcome to the Great Famine of 1315, where it rained for months without mercy. Fields drowned. Grain rotted in the soil. Hay never dried, so livestock starved too. And with no grain and no meat, entire villages withered. Parents buried their children. Children buried their parents. And those who had no one, they simply disappeared. People ate anything. Bark, grass, clay. Dogs vanished. Cats vanished. People vanished. Cannibalism, once a whispered horror, came reality. Not just in stories, not just in cities, in farms, in homes, in the same cottages where lullabies had once been sung. And this wasn't a fluke. Famines struck again and again. 1349, 1369, 1406. Each time the same cycle: crop failure, hoarding, panic, starvation, death. The church told you to pray, the Lord told you to pay, and nature told you to perish. There was no aid, no relief, no surplus. Governments weren't built to save peasants. They were built to exploit them. So you watched your neighbors die and hoped you weren't next. Or worse, you watched them live and envied that they still had the strength to cry. Mass graves became the most efficient form of architecture. Skeletons piled beneath churches, beneath barns, beneath the mud itself. And when the famine ended, those who survived weren't alive. They were just less dead than the rest. This was medieval life at its most honest. Not a tale of knights and glory, but of rotting fields and empty stomachs. Starvation doesn't just waste the body, it rewires the mind. After weeks of empty bowls and sunken eyes, morality becomes a luxury. That neighbor you once shared soup with, now they're competition. That child in the next hut, another mouth stealing your air. Hunger narrows your world to a single question: what will I eat next? And how do I get it first? Fathers stole from their own fields. Mothers hid scraps from their children. Brothers turned in brothers for a slice of bread. The church preached charity, but you stopped believing in saints the day one of them walked past your starving wife and blessed her instead of feeding her. And still, you were judged. If you begged, you were lazy. If you stole, you were a criminal. If you died, you were weak. Starvation wasn't seen as failure of the system. It was your personal flaw. Your hunger was a sin, your desperation a crime. Villages fractured. Fights broke out over moldy grain. People were accused of hoarding, sometimes falsely, sometimes not, and beaten to death. Children disappeared in the night, some sold, some sacrificed to rumors of healing through blood. Yes, that desperate. And yet, the lords still dined. The church still celebrated feast days. The elite still wrote poetry about the beauty of rural life, while peasants gnawed on bones they buried the week before. In time, hunger changed your memories. You forgot what satiety felt like. You forgot what your children looked like before their cheeks sank. You forgot how to speak of tomorrow. The future didn't exist. Only the next meal. Or the chance to steal one. In a medieval village, you didn't live, you endured, at the cost of everything that once made you human. Eventually, your body gave up. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't noble. Maybe it was in your sleep, if hunger ever let you sleep. Maybe in the fields, mid-stride, with a hoe still in your hand. Or maybe on the floor of your hut, your breath slowing beside someone just as thin as you. A partner, a child, a stranger, too weak to move you once you were gone. There was no doctor to declare your passing, no priest rushing to anoint your forehead, no record, no ritual. You didn't die. You disappeared. There was no coffin. Wood was for fires, not corpses. There was no headstone. Stones were for walls, not names. If the ground wasn't frozen, someone might dig a shallow grave. If it was, they'd wait until your body stopped smelling like flesh and started smelling like dirt. Then they'd bury you. Or not. Your family didn't cry. They couldn't. Tears require water, and grief requires energy. All they could do was survive you, and that was hard enough. The church didn't hold a mass. You couldn't afford one. The Lord didn't lower a banner. He never knew your name. And that name, the one your mother whispered when you were born, would vanish with you. There were no family trees for peasants, no biographies, no paintings, just the fading memory of someone who once tried not to die and failed. Another body lost in the quiet churn of hunger and time, and yet the machine marched on. The harvest came. The taxes were still collected. The tithes still paid. The bells rang for saints, not for you. The children you left behind, if they lived, inherited your suffering like land. They learned early to expect nothing, to feel nothing, to die silently. Centuries later, historians would write about grain prices, royal decrees, the weather, but they wouldn't write about you. They'd mention mass famine, peasant mortality, or population decline. Like those weren't people. You weren't collateral damage. You were the plan. The unspoken, brutal balance that kept the lords fat and the church wealthy. You were born to serve. You died to preserve. And history didn't forget you. It never noticed you in the first place. So no, you wouldn't survive in a medieval village, not because of the cold, not because of the work, but because the system wasn't broken. It was designed to consume you.